And gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. I am Urza Master. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Fert Derby. Gentlemen, welcome back to Starfleet Academy as we are jumping into the ending of Star Trek, the original series, or the beginning of the end, shall we say. This is episode 3, season 3, The Paradise Syndrome. And if you've not heard of it, not watched it, buckle up. We are going to a planet where perhaps the Enterprise shouldn't have stopped. Before I get too deep into this one, I'm going to give it over to Fert Derby for a little background and information on whatever this episode was.
Thank you, Urza Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks, Trekkies, for staying with us on this 3-year journey of the original Enterprise NCC 1701 crew. This is indeed episode 3 of season 3, The Paradise Syndrome, first aired on October 4th, 1968. We have a new director, Judd Taylor. He has cut his teeth on everything from Star Trek and Gunsmoke, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., all the way up to more recently Law and Order SVU, and pretty much a lot of episodic television in between. So Judd is a vet behind the camera, and he knows how to wing it and knows how to sling it. Our writer was Margaret Arman, and you might not recognize that name unless you've been following the Warp Core religiously, and I hope that you have. Margaret has previously written an episode of Trek in Season 2. We covered it on Warp Core 55, and if you would like our thoughts on the Gamesters of Triskelion, I urge you to go and seek out Warp Core 55, and you will hear how we felt most clearly about Margaret's debut episode as a writer. This was her second one. It's also the second Star Trek episode to date with the word syndrome in it. You'll remember that we did the immunity syndrome in Warp Core 57. And I think we had a lot more pleasant vibes coming out of the immunity syndrome than we do the paradise syndrome. But I don't want to spoil our reactions. Basically, friends, if you were going to do the elevator pitch to Gene Roddenberry on this one, it is as follows. And I'm merely stating what the episode shows us. Captain Kirk develops amnesia and ends up living with a Native American tribe on a distant world that is threatened by an asteroid that the Enterprise is trying to break up before it hits and fails for much of the episode. And that's it, friends. That's what it is. I don't know if you recall all the times in your favorite television drama or comedy where a character gets a boink on the head or gets zapped by some sort of futuristic technology and then suddenly can't remember who they are or where they came from, and in fact addresses these conundrums through voiceover. Who am I? How did I get here? What does it all mean? But that's this episode. I recall a particular Miami Vice episode which actually took on this trope head on and did so moderately cleverly, because don't forget, if you were a fan of the 1980s MTV Cops, Crockett and Tubbs were always going undercover and pretending to be bad guys in order to bust the bad guys. And they had Sonny Crockett get bumped on the head and forget that he was a cop, and instead he thought he was one of his aliases he was using. And so they had to basically hunt him down because he was basically living the life as a carefree drug smuggler instead of as a Miami Vice narcotics detective trying to bring them down. And I have to admit, that sounds like a cliche too, but at the time, to an 11-year-old boy, it was pretty clever. So I wish we could have had a little bit more of this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time kicking this episode in the teeth. It doesn't give me any joy to kick Star Trek when it's, not at its best, because I think that at its best, it can transcend television through generations and deliver affirming messages about humanity and our quest to be better, and address real-life topical problems as only science fiction allegory can. But this one didn't. And I think the things that most upset me about it, and the jumping off points for the discussion, there was talk when season 3, was saved from cancellation at the last minute and given the graveyard slot on Friday nights, that there would also be strict budgetary cuts to try and lessen the financial impact of the show. And I think this was one of the first episodes where I felt that, but not in the way that you would think. Because with the remastered special effects, with the Enterprise and the asteroid and the phasers and all that, those were fine. But they chose to shoot a great deal of it, it appeared, on location. And using perhaps even sort of shoulder-rigged cameras. I don't think the Steadicam had been quite invented yet, but there was a lot of kind of almost documentary camera work early. When Kirk and Spock and McCoy beam down to this world and so forth. And it's kind of a paradox, but because on the one hand, you're surrounded by beautiful, idyllic scenery, pine trees, lakes, forests. But on the other hand, the way that it was shot, the actual cinematography and the lighting and the lensing and so forth, to this viewer, it felt like it felt cheap. It felt less expensive. It sort of made Star Trek look ordinary. I would have much preferred an episode set almost solely on the existing sets, the bridge set, engineering, the transporter room, what have you. But somehow putting those 3 actors right from the jump in this expansive, think by contrast how beautiful Jonathan Frakes made the alien world look in Star Trek Insurrection, for example. Using the Sierra Mountains and so forth to scenic advantage. Never distracting from the story, but looking like a peaceful world where the Baku were using the Fountain of Youth to re-energize. That's kind of what I was thinking of when I was watching this here. And like I said, I don't know if it was the budget. I don't know if it was first-time director Taylor. I just felt that at every point it looked wrong. It didn't look authentic. And this despite being in the most, natural settings you could get. And I felt the same way watching the portrayal of this alien race, which had adopted many of the indigenous Native American, customs and costumes and so forth. This is definitely a case where if I had seen it in 1968 versus 2024, I would probably have a different opinion than I'm about to share. But I felt like I was watching a 1968 version of the Native people in an attempt to try to be more inclusive. I mean, we're not talking John Wayne westerns where they're just coming over the hillside throwing, long spears and shooting bows and arrows at the white settlers. I get that this episode was trying to give them a sense of agency and characterization that had probably sorely been lacking for the past 70 years beforehand. But then considering all the steps we've made since then, it didn't feel like it came up strong enough. And I'm not going to hold the episode accountable for it. This is 1968. I have to remember that, and I accept that. But that doesn't mean as I'm watching it that I feel in any way emotionally connected to this tribe, to the dynamics of the tribe. There's a certain veneer of artificiality or inauthenticity that just kind of sits there, permeates it. And I don't know how you make it better. I don't think you can, to be honest. And I started daydreaming during the episode, what about other Starfleet captains that we've seen? If you put them in the same script, same story, forget James Tiberius Kirk. What if this had been Jean-Luc Picard, right? Same thing. Gets amnesia, goes native, if you will, with the tribe. Would I have bought it more convincingly with Patrick Stewart, or Avery Brooks, or Kate Mulgrew, or Anson Mount? Like, I was thinking, what if they just rebooted this for Strange New Worlds in some fashion? And no matter which Starfleet captain or, officer I could place in this scenario, I never really wanted, I was never like, oh yeah, that's one I want to see. This would be so much better if it was Picard. And I just feel that overall, I just never saw past the gimmick, and I never became emotionally connected to characters that I am already emotionally connected to. And I think the best parts of the episode are trying to divert the asteroid and Spock taking, the authoritative charge there, and Scotty doing his, "We can't push these engines any further, Mr. Scott, I need full power and I need it now." And you have Chekhov and Sulu on the bridge. I thought McCoy was a little bit like on the needling of Spock in this one. There was a lot of arguing, I thought, for the sake of arguing. Although, that's their dynamic, so I get it. But I thought he was unusually confrontational in this one at almost every turn. And that being said, I think Leonard Nimoy was actually one of the better things in this episode again. From deciphering the obelisk's mysterious writings to musical notes, to not wanting to, take mandated rest when McCoy hectors him about it. Like, there was just, again, he was the calming influence, if you will, because let's face it, Mr. Shatner does get a little bit of leash in this one to run with, and he does not disappoint, whether it's his voiceover, whether it's his fighting with the medicine man, whether it's running shirtless through the woods after his bride, whether it's designing an irrigation system. Like, if we just bring the water here, and then just listening to Tennessee Valley Authority Kirk going through and inventing like gourd lamps, now we can work twice as hard. I don't know, guys. Like I said, I don't take pleasure in Star Trek not being at the top. And I don't think any of us are going to say that this one was at the top. Is it the worst episode we've ever seen? I don't think.
Not yet.
I don't think so. But I did not enjoy this one with the same that I enjoyed the Enterprise incident, in our previous installment of the Warp Core, or even Spock's Brain, which also had a really goofy premise, but somehow had more fun with it, or somehow made some of that goofiness feel natural. And I am not sure that this one was able to overcome some of that artificiality. But, gentlemen, change my mind or agree with me.
No, I'm going to agree with you 100%. Sorry, Urza, I'm going to step on your toes a little bit here, if you don't mind. The only redeeming to me, and this is looking at it from this perspective, is I feel like we get a little bit of Next Gen 2 episodes, right? The idea of seeding planets, so that's kind of brought up again. And to me, this is the Picard episode where was it a satellite or something that zaps him, and he lives a life in 5 minutes or something like that. He lives out his life. I kind of, has children, all that stuff. So I kind of feel like the writers for Next Gen might have pulled a little bit from this episode. But so many things. I have a whole list here. I mean, first of all, did they build that? I thought there was going to be reductions in production costs. They built that whole obelisk in the middle of the woods or something. I'll give them some credit for that. That's about the only credit. I wrote down that McCoy was very tough on Spock, and I like how you put it. I almost feel like, and now that you said that, it was just for the sake of doing so. Now, I can look backwards on it and say, well, it builds into this idea that there's this conflict, but it was over the top almost with him going at Spock. We did get a shirtless Kirk, and trust me, Shatner probably loved every minute of that more than we did. If we loved that, I don't know. Vulcan mind fusion. Not a Vulcan mind meld. It was, he said, Vulcan mind fusion. So that was something else that kind of threw me off there as well. Why didn't they just beam his wife up to the ship when she was dying? I mean, McCoy's just going to do some field surgery there, like it's a civil war, and going to heal her, and then he's like, "Oh, there's nothing I can do, Jim." What? Take her up to the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh, and we were talking about this off air. I thought this episode happened over 3 days. you guys told me it was the full 58. I felt there was no transition to let me know that. Not even a montage. I didn't get that either. I just got, and Fert Derby had to say it, where McCoy says something along the lines of, "You've been staring at the computer screen for 58 days or 57 days or something like that." Whatever on that too. I even have to put my glasses on to get these last couple of points across. I just felt like, to me, there's this saying I use with my players, even my students. You know, you're almost working too hard. You don't have to work that hard. Keep it simple. I felt like they put way too much effort into this episode, and it totally backfires. It almost seemed like, hey, the Enterprises incident was such an awesome episode. Let's see if we can deep six the whole thing in the next two. And this is just the beginning, because, and I hate to spoil it for you, Warp Court fans, but I'm going to just destroy the episode after this.
Me too.
But this, and by the way, Bill Shatner or Karak, we're not even saying his name right in this episode, it's Karak. That is some of the worst CPR I've ever seen performed. I can't believe that kid lived. Who taught Karak CPR? Because, and there was some pretty risque CPR, by the way. I mean, even in 1968, like, whoa. Whoa, is what I have to say to that. Last but not least, I'm just rattling off all this bad stuff because whatever. That obelisk board made the exact same noises as the Enterprise computers made. Like, they couldn't even change up the sound effects.
Saving money on Foley.
So with that, ouch, yikes. Please make it stop, but they're only going to make it worse. With that, Urza Master, I'll turn it over to you.
Allow me to try and rescue this episode somewhat.
Oh, this would be fun.
I'm going to take a stab at it. And I'll say it took me 3 goes to get through this episode. So I didn't love it. But it is a tale of 2 stories, and I think one was way more successful than the other. If you made an episode all about Spock somehow being the captain for a minute, for whatever reason, and his job is to deflect this asteroid, and he's trying to make the call as his first time in command, like we see on Strange New Worlds when Spock goes to save Pike, I think this episode's all right. It's not great. I think McCoy is a little too harsh on Spock, and I don't, like, even for their contentious relationship, I don't think that plays very well. But I think you get a couple of real heartfelt moments where Spock makes the wrong call. And McCoy's like, look, Jim would have done the same thing. You're just dealing with guilt. You need to rest. I think they could have acted that out a little more heartfelt. And even though Spock doesn't feel emotions, I think that would have added some depth to McCoy's character. And you do get the classic Scotty, I'm giving her all she's got. And it's like they don't care about engineering. It's like, okay, that was cool. I like that a lot. If we'd have gotten some Chekhov, some Uhura, a little more Sulu, a little more space time, I think we could have seen stronger storytelling from that aspect. Similar to an episode, I forget which one. If you roll back in our archives, make sure you're subscribed at the same time. There was another episode where it was like half the episode was really good, and the other half, told elsewhere, was really bad. I think it was A Private Little War. But I think similar to that, you get another pseudo-native storyline where Kirk is a heavy influence, and it really doesn't go well. For a multitude of reasons. I think even in late 60s era television, this was a bit on the racist side. I don't think, and I don't think they were lampooning. I don't think there was any kind of ill intent or like that. You know, you never got the classic Native American voice, right? You didn't get the smoke signal over there. You know, you didn't get any of that. You didn't get any John Redcorn-esque speech. No hate on John Redcorn. I thought that character was fantastic. As a matter of fact, it was kind of making fun of those stereotypes if you're an avid watcher of King of the Hill as I am. But I think you got enough of the whole, like, this is how the tribe works mentality, and the whole, like, God, they're not smart enough to figure out that he's just some dude. Like, there's enough there where it's like you're sort of downplaying, I don't know, the brains of the group. And I mean, I get it to a certain extent. Like, you have to. There has to be a vehicle in the episode, right? So I don't hate it. If it was just some alien race, probably wouldn't even notice it. But the fact that it's like pseudo Native Americans, I know they're trying to provide a context people of the era would understand. Like, now, if it was a colony of Ferengi, we'd be like, oh, all right, you know, Ferengi. Although Ferengi are problematic in and of themselves. But you know, it felt very inauthentic. It really felt like they were trying to make a Western for William Shatner without making it a Western. And it just,
Did he ever get on a horse? I would have killed to see Shatner on a horse, figuring.
I think honestly that might have made it better if there would have been a horse injected in the episode, or a horseback riding scene or something.
Right.
The whole I'm burying your child thing was weird to me. He's only there for 60 days. And suddenly he's married, he's going to have a kid. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I thought David was his only kid. You know, not realizing that, oh, they're just going to kill her and the baby off, which seems pretty heavy for 1968 TV. I thought maybe it was one of those where, like, you know, he just abandons the kid on this planet thing, and that's just that.
Yes, that's what I thought was going to happen too.
And that would have been a lot more, like, predictable. And been like, all right, yeah, that makes sense. And then maybe they'll dig that up for a future Star Trek movie or something. The one thing I will say that I think I give some of these bad episodes credit for is how they've inspired other shows to do very similar storylines to varying degrees of success. And there is one show in the sci-fi realm that did almost this exact storyline to the infinite degree better. So much so that, like, it's one of the best episodes, I think, of this series, which is renowned for having great TV, and that's Stargate SG-1. For my Stargate fans out there, you probably already know I'm going to talk about the episode in Season 3, 100 Days, in which Jack O'Neill is marooned on a planet where they can't access the gate. He's stuck there for a really long time, falls in love with one of the native women, and it's basically like Wild West era, you know, settlers era, white people, basically. There's no, like, you know, it's just like the West. Oregon Trail type people, and he just fits right in. He's like, all right, I'm going to do farm labor. This is where I live now. But comparing that being marooned, he doesn't lose his memory or anything. They don't cross into that trope. And I feel like if it was Kirk getting marooned and not losing his memory and just having to blend in with this society somehow, that would have made a better episode. You know, the whole memory loss thing and then being called Karak. I'm like, really? They couldn't think of something else? I really think they could have done it where it's like, oh, the Enterprise got called away and I don't know if they'll ever be back because the warp engines failed in deep space, and that was the last message I got because communications went down because of radiation or whatever. That would have been cool. And it's like, you know, oh, in 60 days of being marooned here, you impregnated a local girl? That does seem very Kirk. I'm not going to lie. So, you know, look, not every episode's going to be a winner. Even in a 3-season series, you know, look at British TV. Blackadder episodes, they weren't all great. Not every episode of Fawlty Towers was fantastic. There were some that were just serviceable. This one is maybe a little bit serviceable, I guess. I mean, you get some good iconic moments with Scott, and you get a couple moments with Sulu. You get to see Uhura in the background. You get a little bit of Spock being Spock, you know, being that, like, stubborn Vulcan fighting with McCoy. Like, there were some good things. This was kind of like if you took the writer's room scrap papers and you threw it into a bin and then just kept shuffling them until you got an episode. I feel like this is what you'd get. Because it has all the episodes of Star Trek. It just has none of the oomph.
Yes.
Well,
Distinct
I think
lack of
we're.
growth.
I think that puts us at our warp core
Yes.
because there's
Yes,
not a whole
Gary.
lot more to say.
Yeah, that's all I have to say about that, Forrest.
Well, Lord Uther, kick us off.
All right. Oh, man. I think you actually made me boost up my warp core score a little bit by saying that. All right. I'm going to go 2.5. I'll go 3. And that's probably generous. I should probably go 2.5. But I'm going to go 3 because, yes, if we just go with the idea of Spock having to be in command and the pressures of command that even get to a Vulcan. Ooh, I just came up with that now, and that makes the episode a little bit better. Okay, that makes me feel better about it. Like, he was even showing some of that pressure, too, out of concern for his friend, which I think is important, coming from a Vulcan, to have that emotion. And the idea that I feel like maybe Next Gen pulled a couple things from this and a couple of those other episodes. I will go 3 out of 7 warp cores. I'm feeling generous today, and I do have a Starfleet shirt on, so that could be why as well. Fert,
I think
what say you?
I think the number 3 was invented for episodes like this. I have yet to see a Star Trek fall below, I think, 3. I don't think I've ever been castigated one that harshly, although I'm leaving room, depending on Lord Uther's interpretation of future episodes. But I think that, like I say, I think we've seen worse execution, and I think we've seen things that have really got my red blood racing in the wrong direction. This episode didn't offend me. It didn't offend my sensibilities. It never got out of first gear, and so it just kind of idled along. And I think, to Urza Master's point, there were places it could have gone that could have easily shifted into second, third, and higher, but they didn't quite take that next leap, evolutionary leap. So yeah, 3 feels right.
Kind of like that Pinto that I learned how to drive stick shift in for the first time, where Doug took me out and that thing just wouldn't get out of first gear, and the brakes were going on it as well. That's how I learned stick shift.
Well, hey,
Aaron's dad taking me driving, so there we go. Oh, he's got a picture of it. I drove that thing. Yeah. That's how I learned about downshifting. I could not trust the brakes on that car, so I had to downshift every time we came to a stop. So I was going to get the Suzuki
Ford
Samurai.
with wood paneling. Yes, the Canby Cruiser.
So good.
Okay.
that's a great metaphor for this particular episode. Yes, I give it a 3 out of 7 warp cores. Honestly, I will say that as I was doing my finish viewing, shall we say, my third viewing, to wrap it up just today because it took me a couple of days, I found that I liked what was going on off the planet so much more that if it would have been more of that and just even no Kirk, could we go an episode without Captain Kirk? That would have given me maybe a 4. The planet episode was probably a 1, maybe a 2. So if I combine them, I'll take a 3. And the fact that it reminded me of 100 Days on Stargate SG-1, which is another one of my favorite shows, it gives me a little rosy feeling. I'm gonna say it inspired good TV, even though it was not good TV. But with that, until we meet again to discuss what we've teased as potentially the worst episode of Star Trek the original series, we'll have to see. I will say to you all, from us here at the crew of the Warp Core podcast, live long and prosper.